The diner was dimly lit, with a thick cloud of cigarette smoke hanging in the air. Mike Tyson sat alone in the corner, nursing a cup of coffee. He'd been coming here for years, ever since he left the boxing ring behind. It was a place where he could find some peace and quiet, away from the chaos of the city. But tonight, there was a disturbance. A big, burly man in an expensive suit was leaning over the counter, shouting at the young waitress. Tyson couldn't make out the words, but the man's aggressive posture and the fear in the waitress's eyes told him everything he needed to know. Without a moment's hesitation, Tyson rose from his seat and strode across the diner. The man turned just in time to see Tyson's fist coming straight at his face. The blow landed with a sickening crunch, and the man crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The diner fell silent, everyone staring at Tyson in disbelief. He looked down at the man, his chest heaving. He hadn't felt that rush of adrenaline in years, not since his fighting days. But the satisfaction of seeing the bully taken down was short-lived. Suddenly, the door to the kitchen burst open, and two more men in suits came charging out. Tyson braced himself, ready to take them on as well. But before they could reach him, a voice called out from the shadows. "Hold it right there, gentlemen." A third man emerged, his face obscured by the dim lighting. He was older, with a sharp, angular face and piercing eyes. Tyson recognized him instantly. It was Sal, the notorious mob boss who had ruled the city's underworld for decades. "I think we've had enough violence for one night," Sal said, his voice smooth and calm. He gestured to the two men, who immediately backed off. Tyson watched as Sal approached the downed man, kneeling beside him and checking his pulse. "Looks like your friend here needs a doctor," he said, glancing up at Tyson. "You really did a number on him." Tyson didn't know what to say. He was suddenly very aware of the fact that he was standing in the middle of a mob-controlled diner, having just assaulted one of Sal's men. "You know, we don't take kindly to our people being manhandled," Sal continued, rising to his feet. "But I have to say, I'm impressed by your quick action. Not many men would have the guts to stand up to one of my guys like that." Tyson shifted uncomfortably, unsure of where this was going. Sal studied him for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "You know, Mike, I think you and I might have a lot in common. You've got a reputation for being a tough guy, someone who doesn't back down from a fight, and that's exactly the kind of person I could use in my line of work." Tyson felt his heart racing. He knew that Sal was offering him a way into the shadowy world of the mob, a world he had always tried to avoid. But the temptation was there, the allure of power and respect that had once fueled his boxing career. As Sal continued to speak, Tyson found himself drawn in, captivated by the older man's charisma and the promise of a new life. He knew that if he accepted Sal's offer, he would be crossing a line, one that he might never be able to come back from. But deep down, he couldn't help but wonder if this was the path he was always meant to take. After all, he'd spent his entire life fighting, both in and out of the ring. Maybe this was just the next chapter in his story, a chance to put his legendary toughness to use in a whole new way. As Sal extended his hand, Tyson hesitated for just a moment. Then, with a deep breath, he reached out and shook it, sealing his fate and plunging himself into the shadowy world of the mob. The diner fell silent as Sal extended his hand to Tyson. The ex-boxer hesitated for just a moment before firmly grasping it, sealing his fate and plunging himself into the shadowy world of the mob. Sal's sharp eyes studied Tyson, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Welcome to the family, my friend," he said, his voice smooth and rich. "I have a feeling you and I are going to get along just fine." Tyson nodded, his mind racing. He knew he was making a dangerous bargain, but something about Sal's offer had intrigued him. The chance to use his legendary toughness and fighting skills in a new arena was undeniably tempting. As Sal turned to address his men, the kitchen door burst open once again. This time it was a young, frantic-looking man in a waiter's uniform, his eyes wide with fear. "Boss, we've got trouble," he gasped, his words tumbling out in a rush. "It's the cops. They're on their way." Sal's expression hardened, all traces of amusement vanishing. "How did they find out?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. The waiter shrank back, trembling. I don't know, sir, but they're coming, and they're coming fast." Tyson watched as Sal's men sprang into action, scrambling to secure the diner and cover their tracks. The once peaceful establishment was now a hive of frantic activity, with everyone desperately trying to hide any incriminating evidence. Sal turned to Tyson, his face grim. "It seems our little gathering has been compromised," he said, his tone clipped and businesslike. "You need to get out of here, now." Tyson hesitated, unsure of what to do. He'd never been in a situation like this before, and the adrenaline was starting to kick in. "But what about you?" he asked, his voice low. Sal's eyes narrowed. Don't worry about me, Tyson. I've been in tighter spots than this. Just get out of here and lay low until this blows over. Tyson nodded, his mind racing. As he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of the young waitress, her face pale and her hands trembling. He knew he couldn't just abandon her to the chaos. Without a moment's hesitation, Tyson strode over to her and grabbed her arm. "Come on, you're coming with me," he said, his voice firm. The waitress looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "What? Why?" Tyson didn't have time to explain. "Just trust me," he said, already cooling her towards the exit. "We need to get out of here, now." As they made their way through the crowded diner, Tyson could hear the sirens in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. He knew they had to move fast if they were going to escape the impending police raid. Just as they reached the door, Tyson glanced back at Sal, who was standing calmly amidst the chaos, his eyes locked on Tyson's. In that moment, Tyson saw something in the older man's gaze, a flash of something that might have been respect, or perhaps even a warning. Then the door slammed shut behind them, and Tyson and the waitress were out on the street, running for their lives. Here's a continuation of the story, with a shocking plot twist. Mike and the young waitress burst out into the cool night air, their hearts pounding. The sound of sirens was getting closer. The cops would be on them any second. "This way, hurry." Mike grabbed the waitress's arm and pulled her down a dark alley. They ran as fast as they could, desperate to put distance between themselves and the diner. After a few blocks, Mike finally slowed to a stop, panting heavily. The waitress doubled over, gasping for breath. Who are you?" she asked between breaths. "Why did you help me?" Mike looked at her, debating how much to say. "I couldn't just leave you back there," he said finally. "That place was about to get real ugly." The waitress nodded slowly, still trying to catch her breath. "Well, thanks, I guess. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." Her voice trailed off as the sound of sirens suddenly grew deafening. Red and blue lights flashed at the mouth of the alley. Mike cursed under his breath. They must have been spotted leaving the diner. "Come on, we gotta keep moving." He grabbed her hand and they took off running again. They weaved through the dark side streets, trying to lose their pursuers, but the cops were relentless, closing in from all sides. Mike could feel the adrenaline surging through him, his instincts kicking into overdrive. Finally, they reached a dead end. Mike looked around frantically, but there was nowhere left to run. He pushed the waitress behind him, ready to make a stand. Just then, a car screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. Mike braced himself, preparing for the worst. But to his surprise, the car door flew open and a familiar figure emerged. "Get in, quickly!" Sal shouted, his eyes wide. Mike hesitated for a moment, unsure if he could trust the mob boss. But with the cops closing in, he had no choice. He grabbed the waitress's hand and they jumped into the backseat of Sal's car. The tires screeched as Sal floored the gas, the car careening recklessly through the city streets. Mike and the waitress clung to the seats, their hearts pounding.
"What the hell is going on?" Mike yelled over the roar of the engine. Sal glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his face grim. "We've got a serious problem, my friend. The cops have been onto us for weeks, and they finally figured out where we were holed up." Mike felt a chill run down his spine. "So what now? Where are you taking us?" Sal's expression hardened. "To a safe house. We need to lay low until we can figure out our next move." The car swerved around a corner, the waitress letting out a terrified squeal. Mike gripped the seat, his knuckles turning white. He couldn't believe this was happening. Just a few hours ago, he'd been sitting peacefully in the diner, and now he was caught up in the middle of a mob chase. As they careened through the city, Mike couldn't help but wonder what Sal had gotten him into. Had he made a mistake in trusting the mob boss? And what about the waitress? Was she going to be dragged down into this mess as well? Suddenly, Sal let out a sharp curse. Damn, they've got roadblocks ahead. Mike's heart sank as he saw the flashing lights and barricades up ahead. There was no way they were going to be able to outrun the cops this time. Sal's eyes darted around frantically, searching for a way out. Hang on, this is going to be a bumpy ride. He jerked the steering wheel, sending the car careening onto a side street. Mike and the waitress were thrown violently against the doors, their screams of terror mingling with the wail of the sirens. Just when it seemed like they were going to crash, Sal suddenly wrenched the wheel again, sending the car hurtling down a narrow alley. Mike squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for impact. But the impact never came. Instead, the car burst out of the alley and onto a deserted highway, leaving the cops far behind. Mike opened his eyes, stunned. "How the—" he started, but Sal cut him off. "I know these streets like the back of my hand," the mob boss said, a grim smile on his face. "But we're not out of the woods yet. We need to get to that safe house, fast." As the car sped down the highway, Mike glanced over at the waitress. She was huddled in the corner, her face ashen with fear. He felt a pang of guilt, knowing that he had dragged her into this mess. But there was no turning back now. Whatever was waiting for them at that safe house, Mike knew he had to be ready to face it, because if there was one thing he'd learned from his days in the ring, it was that you never back down from a fight. Here's a continuation of the story with a shocking plot twist. The car sped down the empty highway, the only sound the roar of the engine and the occasional crackle of the police radio. Mike gripped the seat, his heart pounding. He glanced over at the waitress, her face pale and terrified. Sal kept his eyes fixed on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We're almost there," he said, his voice tense. "Just hang tight." Mike nodded, but his mind was racing.
What was waiting for them at this safe house? Was he making a huge mistake by trusting Sal? He couldn't help but remember the shocked look on the mob boss's face back at the diner. Had he not expected the police raid? Suddenly, the car lurched to the side as Sal swerved to avoid something on the road. Mike and the waitress were thrown against the doors, gasping in fear. "What the hell was that?" Mike shouted, his voice shaking. Sal's eyes narrowed. "Damn, they must have sent someone to cut us off." He glanced at the rearview mirror, his expression grim. "We've got company." Mike's heart sank as he saw the headlights of another car closing in behind them. He could feel the adrenaline surging through him, his instincts screaming at him to fight or flee. "Can we lose them?" he asked, trying to keep the panic out of his voice. Sal shook his head. "Not with this kind of pursuit. They're not going to let us get away that easy." The car behind them drew closer, its high beams blinding Mike. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the air, and the back window of Sal's car shattered. "They're shooting at us," the waitress cried, her voice shrill with terror. Mike grabbed her, pulling her down as more gunshots rang out. Sal swerved wildly, trying to evade the barrage of bullets. "Hang on," the mob boss yelled, his eyes narrowed in concentration. The chase continued, the cars weaving and dodging through the darkness. Mike's heart was pounding in his ears, his mind racing with a million thoughts. What had he gotten himself into? And more importantly, was he going to make it out of this alive? Just when it seemed like they might lose their pursuers, another car suddenly appeared in front of them, blocking the road. Sal cursed, slamming on the brakes, but it was too late. The two cars collided with a deafening crash, metal screeching and glass shattering. Mike was thrown forward, his head slamming against the seat in front of him. He felt a sharp pain in his side, and when he looked down, he saw a shard of glass embedded in his skin. The waitress was screaming, her voice high and panicked. Mike reached out to her, but his vision was blurring, and he could feel the warmth of his own blood seeping through his shirt. As he slipped into unconsciousness, the last thing he saw was Sal's lifeless body slumped over the steering wheel, his eyes wide and vacant. Mike woke with a start, his heart pounding. He blinked, his vision slowly coming into focus. He was lying on a bed in a dim-lit room, bandages wrapped around his torso. "What happened?" he croaked, his voice raspy. A figure moved in the shadows, and suddenly Sal's face came into view. Mike recoiled, his eyes wide with shock. You're alive," he whispered, his mind racing. Sal chuckled, a cold, humorless laugh. "Of course I'm alive, Tyson. Did you really think a little car accident could take me down?" Mike stared at him, his mind spinning. "But I thought you were—"
"Dead?" Sal interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "No, my friend. I'm very much alive, and I have a little surprise for you." Sal stepped aside, and Mike's heart nearly stopped. There, lying on a second bed, was the waitress, her wrists bound, her eyes wide with terror. "What is this?" Mike demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. Sal's lips curled into a sinister smile. "This, my dear Tyson, is where the real game begins." Mike felt a chill run down his spine as Sal's words echoed in the silence of the room. The shocking twist had left him completely off balance, and he knew that whatever was about to happen, it was going to change everything. As he stared at the bound waitress, Mike couldn't help but wonder if he had made the biggest mistake of his life by trusting Sal. And with the mob boss's true nature now revealed, he knew he had to be prepared for anything. Because in this world, nothing was as it seemed. Here is a new chapter continuing the story with a shocking plot twist. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that the waitress was tied up on the other bed. My head was still spinning from the crash and the revelation that Sal was actually alive. What the hell was going on here? Sal just stood there, that creepy smile on his face. "Surprised?" he said, chuckling. I have to admit, I'm quite impressed you managed to survive that little stunt back there. You're tougher than you look, Tyson. I glared at him, struggling to sit up despite the pain in my side. What is the meaning of this? I demanded, gesturing toward the waitress. What have you done to her? Sal smiled widened. Done to her? Oh no, my friend, I haven't done anything to her. Yet. He paused, his eyes gleaming with malice. You see, this little lady holds the key to our future. I felt a chill run down my spine. What are you talking about? Sal began pacing back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back. You know, Tyson, when I first met you back at the diner, I saw something special in you. A ruthlessness, a willingness to do what it takes to survive, and I knew I had to have you on my team. He stopped and turned to face me, his expression deadly serious. But then you had to go and complicate things by bringing this girl into the mix. He glanced over at the waitress, his lip curling in disgust. You see, Tyson, I can't have any loose ends, and unfortunately for her, that's exactly what she is, a loose end that needs to be tied up. My heart sank as the realization hit me. You're going to kill her, I whispered, my voice shaking. Sal laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. Kill her? Oh no, Tyson, I have something much more entertaining in mind. He stepped closer to the waitress, who shrank back in terror. You see, this lovely young lady has some very valuable information that I need, information that could help me take down my enemies and solidify my position in this city. He leaned in, his face just inches from hers.
And I'm going to get that information, one way or another. I felt bile rising in my throat as I watched Sal caress the waitress's cheek, her eyes wide with fear. You're a monster, I spat, my hands clenching into fists. Sal straightened up and fixed me with a cold, calculating stare. Perhaps, but I'm also a man who gets what he wants, and right now what I want is that information, and you, my friend, are going to help me get it. My blood went cold. What are you saying? Sal's lips curled into a twisted smile. I'm saying that you have a choice, Tyson. You can either help me extract the information I need from this girl, or you can watch her suffer the consequences. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. And trust me, the consequences will be unpleasant. I stared at him, my mind racing. I couldn't believe this was happening. Just hours ago, I had been a simple ex-boxer trying to find some peace in a dingy diner. Now I was caught up in a twisted game of life and death, with the fate of an innocent woman hanging in the balance. I glanced over at the waitress, her eyes pleading with me. I knew I couldn't just let her be tortured, no matter what Sal had in store. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in way over my head. As Sal waited for my response, I knew I had to make a choice. Would I risk everything to try and save the waitress, or would I give in to Sal's demands and become complicit in his twisted plans? The decision weighed heavily on me, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever I chose, I knew it would change the course of my life forever, and the thought of that terrified me more than anything. Here's the final chapter to conclude the story. All right, let me tell you how this whole thing went down. It was the craziest, most messed up situation I'd ever been in, but somehow I made it through. When Sal laid out his twisted plan, my heart was racing. He wanted me to help him torture that poor waitress to get information out of her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This guy was a straight-up monster. But I also knew I couldn't just let him do it. Even though I barely knew the waitress, I couldn't live with myself if I just stood by and watched her suffer. She was an innocent caught up in all of this, and I felt responsible for bringing her into it. So I told Sal that I wouldn't help him, no matter what. I said I'd die before I laid a finger on that girl. And let me tell you, the look on his face was priceless. He did not like hearing the word no from me. He started yelling and threatening me, saying I'd regret it, but I stood my ground. I wasn't going to be a part of his sick games. That's when things really hit the fan. Sal flew into a rage and lunged at me, trying to strangle me right there. We started brawling, knocking over furniture and smashing stuff. It was total chaos.
In the middle of the fight, the waitress managed to free her hands and started screaming for help. I guess she was hoping someone would hear her and come to our rescue. Well, Sal must have realized things were spinning out of control because he suddenly broke away from me and pulled a gun.
He pointed it straight at the waitress, his finger on the trigger. "One more sound out of you and you're dead," he snarled. The waitress froze, her eyes wide with terror. I felt my stomach drop. I had to do something, fast. Without thinking, I launched myself at Sal, tackling him to the ground. The gun went flying out of his hand and skidded across the floor. We grappled and traded blows, each of us fighting for our lives. At one point, Sal managed to get on top of me, his hands around my throat. I could feel the life draining out of me, my vision starting to blur. But just when I thought it was all over, the waitress grabbed the gun and pointed it straight at Sal. "Get off him!" she yelled, her voice trembling. Sal froze, his eyes darting between me and the gun. Slowly, he released his grip on my neck and raised his hands. The waitress motioned for him to move away, and he grudgingly complied. I gasped for air, coughing and sputtering. The waitress rushed over to me, her hands shaking. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. "Yeah, I'm all right." I glanced over at Sal, who was glaring at us with pure hatred. "What now?" I asked the waitress. "We can't just let him go." She bit her lip, her eyes full of uncertainty. I don't know. I've never done anything like this before." We both looked at Sal, who was watching us intently. I could see the wheels turning in his head, and I knew we had to act fast. Suddenly, an idea came to me. "Wait here," I told the waitress, and I slowly got to my feet, wincing at the pain in my side. I walked over to Sal, who was eyeing me warily. "All right, Sal," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll make you a deal." Sal raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. "I'm listening." "You let us walk out of here, no questions asked," I said, "and I won't tell anyone what happened. Your little secret stays buried." Sal studied me for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "And what makes you think I'll just let you go?" I leaned in closer, lowering my voice. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure the cops find out everything, and then it's game over for you, my friend." Sal's smile faded, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew I was serious. After a tense moment, he sighed and nodded. "Fine," he growled. "Get out of here, but if I ever see your face again, I won't be so generous." I nodded and turned to the waitress, who was watching us with wide eyes. "Come on," I said, taking her by the arm. "Let's get out of here." As we hurried out of the room, I could feel Sal's burning gaze on my back.
I knew that this wasn't the end of it, that somehow, some way, he'd be back. But for now, we were free. The waitress and I made our way out of the building and onto the deserted street. We walked in silence for a while, both of us shaken by what had just happened. Finally, the waitress stopped and turned to me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saved my life back there." I shrugged, suddenly feeling a little awkward. "Hey, it's no big deal. I couldn't just let that creep hurt you." She smiled, and for the first time I really saw her, not just as a waitress caught up in a mob mess, but as a real person. "Well, I'm grateful, and I owe you one." I nodded, unsure of what to say. We stood there for a moment, the tension slowly dissipating. "So, what now?" I asked. The waitress shrugged. "I don't know. But I do know one thing. I'm never setting foot in that diner again." She laughed, and I couldn't help but join in. As we walked away, leaving the chaos of the past few hours behind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I had made it through this mess, and I had even managed to save an innocent life in the process. But deep down, I knew that this wasn't the end. Sal was still out there, and he wasn't the kind of guy who took betrayal lightly. Sooner or later, he'd come looking for me. And when he did, I'd have to be ready. Because in the world I now found myself in, there was no room for weakness. It was a game of survival. And I had just made my first move. Now, it was time to see how far I was willing to go to come out on top.